got over the weekend, and yet is still certainly extraordinarily sad to report. If I'm the first to tell you, let me tell you how sorry I am to tell you that Pat Summitt has died, the legendary women's coach at the University of Tennessee, the winningest coach in Division I college basketball history, who boosted the women's game, has died at the age of 64. That news coming across the Associated Press wire literally 1 minute ago. Anyone who was following the news over the weekend saw that her family had put out word that this clearly the end was near. It wasn't clear whether it would be, I believe in their statement over the weekend, I'm just remembering it, it wasn't clear if it would be a day, a month, or a year, but that it had taken a turn from which it clearly was not going to turn back. Pat Summitt, an iconic figure, I think one of the most universally respected people in sports for generations, literally generations. Her influence goes back generations, and it will go forward for all intents and purposes indefinitely. Pat Summitt dies at the age of 64. Again, that news just coming across the Associated Press wire moments ago. Guys, your thoughts?
At 64, you're reminded of that age, and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. But we knew the illness had really taken over her way of life. And towards the end, I think there were even concerns with how she was able to kind of handle herself day to day. Her first season is 1974 and 1975. So think about that. She's the head coach of the Vols at 24 years old, and she takes that all the way through 2012. And Greeny, there was a girl that I used to know who's from Tennessee, right? And we were hanging out somewhere, and she had a Lady Vols basketball camp shirt on. And I thought, like, what? Like, you don't play basketball. You've never, ever talked about basketball. Like what, you went to basketball camp? And she was like, yeah, when you're a little girl from Tennessee, you go to basketball camp. You go to Pat Summitt's Lady Vols basketball camp. And when you think about these different pockets we have in the country and certain passions for sports, like areas that are just obsessed with hockey, lacrosse, all these different things, to think that in the South you would have just this empire of women's basketball that was so far beyond anything else that was going on in the country. Granted, UConn started becoming a competitor there in the 90s, but I don't even know how you do that. I don't know how you can be that dominant in comparison to everybody else. Like, you should be in your own league, and that's what she was the head of.
Yeah, and making women's basketball popular, where you're in the heart of the South where football is king, and they were actually selling out the arena to get people to come watch women's basketball. But you said something, Greeny, that made me think, because you said, universally respected. And whenever I hear that, I'm always like, well, is that the media talking? Is that everybody from the outside, or is that the inside? But then when you actually read some of the stories over the weekend about her past players who played under her, making the pilgrimage back home to see her, to pay their respects, and seeing the outpouring of emotion from those players, it just speaks volumes about the impact that she had on, the wins are great, but the impact that she had on so many women's lives that played under her, it's just remarkable.
Well, I heard her speak so many different times. You hear the stories about how she would coach practice and then she would do the laundry afterwards. And we're going back to a time when women's basketball, I can't give you numbers, but the budgets obviously were next to nothing. And to not only to have seen it grow, but to have been the single most important person in making it grow to what it is now, where it is a significant national sport, where the games are televised on ESPN and other places, where the Final Four is actually a major event in this country. Not to compare it with men's sports, but it is a significant event. We, the three of us, are all old enough to remember a time when I wouldn't have known when the women's Final Four was going on, and now it's televised nationally and gets good television ratings and all of that, and is growing and growing. And there are a lot of people who get a lot of credit for that, a lot of great players and a lot of other coaches, obviously Gino Auriemma being at the top of that list, but no one person is more responsible for that, not even close, than Pat Summitt, going back as far as it does. I'm just continuing to scroll through the wires here. I'll read you what the Washington Post just put out. Pat Summitt, who won 8 national championships as head coach of the University of Tennessee women's basketball team, has died. Summitt had more wins than any NCAA college basketball coach in history when she was forced to retire at the age of 59 because of a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's disease. Summitt unexpectedly became coach of the Tennessee Lady Vols when she was 22, and over a 38-year career formed a dynasty seldom matched in any college sport. She was National Coach of the Year 7 times, was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 2000, 12 years before she stepped down with a record 1,098 victories. So we'll continue to look into this and get more information. And obviously, we will work the phones and find some folks who played for Pat Summitt and worked alongside her and with her and against her and all the rest of that. Again, Pat Summitt, a legendary figure, a term that perhaps gets overused from time to time, but truly a living legend. Pat Summitt is dead at the age of 64.
If you think about all the championships, 8 of them, 3 straight there in the 90s, and I'll never forget, just being a guy and, you're in college and, I think that your perspective on female sports changes. You start to have a little bit more life experience. Like, it's almost uncool, right? Like, you wouldn't sit there in college and be like, hey, what are you doing? And I'd be like, oh, I'm going to watch women's college basketball. Like, you just wouldn't say it, even if you wanted to. But it was funny because whenever Tennessee was playing UConn, like, you'd notice like 10 guys that played sports in college would be sitting in a dorm room watching those two teams play because of the rivalry and because of the level of basketball. And, I remember Bob Ryan, who's just one of the absolute best voices on basketball in the country. Like, he would say, if you just love the movement, the half-court movement, some of the stuff that we just don't even see anymore with the three-point line in the NBA, he'd be like, that's the kind of game that you would want to watch.
One of the reasons she was so dominant, her program was so dominant too, is she changed the way people looked at women's basketball and changed the way you coached women's basketball. She would bring in, some men from the guys' side to come in and practice against the girls so that they had tougher competition, because basically they couldn't find any on the women's side. But she wanted to keep pushing her team and getting them better and better. So as much as we talk about, the campaigns that are going on now, throw like a girl and how, all these things that we're trying to change, she was a trendsetter there and one of the pioneers in the way we look at women, female athletes.
I've got a series of notes here. Pat Summitt took the Tennessee head coaching job in 1974 at the age of 22, 2 years after Title IX was passed. At that time, women's college basketball was not yet an NCAA-sanctioned sport. In her 38 seasons, she led the Lady Vols to 8 national championships, 18 Final Fours, and 1 perfect season. They never had a losing season during her tenure. Since the women's NCAA tournament began in 1982, every student-athlete who played 4 years for Pat Summitt reached the Elite Eight at least once. She coached some of the best players in women's college basketball history, including Shamiqua Holdsclaw, Tamika Catchings, Candace Parker. She was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2000, named the Naismith Coach of the Century that same year. In August 2011, she announced she had been diagnosed with early onset dementia. Shortly after the diagnosis, she and her son Tyler created the Pat Summitt Foundation, dedicated to winning the fight against Alzheimer's disease. She coached the Lady Vols in the 2011-12 season. For her 38th and final year, was given the title of head coach emeritus upon her resignation. She was awarded the Arthur Ashe Courage Award in 2012, as well as the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian award in the United States. The Pat Summitt Alzheimer's Clinic at the University of Tennessee Medical Center is scheduled to open in December of this year. So unfortunately, she didn't live to see that open. It's a horrible disease. Without getting into a lot of detail, anyone who listens to the show, you know that my father died earlier this year. We went through something similar. He didn't have Alzheimer's, but there are varying forms of dementia, and so I know a little bit about this. It's extraordinarily difficult on the people around the person at the center. It was not early onset in our, again, not to compare the circumstances at all. She was only 64 years old. I mean, it's obviously a horrible, sad, terrible situation. And I hope, listen, you wish the best for her family, for her friends, those who are close to her. You know the women who played for her loved her. We have so many of them who work here, who have worked here over the years, who you've had the chance to sit down and talk to about what Pat Summitt meant. I remember sitting with Bob Knight and Pat Summitt one time and listening to the two of them talking about coaching and talking about their philosophies. And there was sort of an underlying similarity between the two of them. It was kind of hard to pinpoint. They weren't that similar as people really. Sometimes people position them together because Pat Summitt had that glare and she had that sort of obvious intrinsic toughness about her. When you heard them talk, there were a lot of differences between the two, but there were certainly some similarities. I remember sitting and listening to that conversation.
It probably felt unique be one of the few people that could walk into a room and sit down and have Bob Knight respect him.
Absolutely. Bob Knight respected her enormously. Everyone did. But Pat Summitt, she was one of those people who it was impossible to walk into a room and not recognize that she was the person in charge. And it basically didn't matter who else was in the room. So there were some people who just have that kind of aura about them. Pat Summitt had that aura about her. It's difficult to explain exactly how that comes about. You know, Danny, you would have been in college. I'm trying to, it's that part of the country. Obviously, it's not the same conference or anything like that, but that part of the country, an understanding. I remember when she received the Arthur Ashe Award, I remember Peyton Manning was the one who came out and presented it to her at the ESPYs. I remember how Peyton spoke about her. I'm just trying to come up with other ways to try and explain to people who might not otherwise be inclined to care that much of just how significant a figure in the growth of something, in basically taking something from nothing to something that Pat Summitt was. It's difficult to explain just how significant she was.
It really is. When you look at it, I mean, I played for a great coach in Bobby Bowden, and I would say she's the equivalent or even more so in women's college basketball because of the dominance that she displayed. And like you said, building a program from scratch, and you go back and look at the numbers, I wasn't aware that she was named head coach that early. I mean, can you imagine being in charge and trying to gain control? But you talk about that look, that being able to command a room. It's obviously something that was a God-given gift that she was born with, to be able to take over and from the start to see results and turn this program and build it into what it was, you know, what it's become today.
But you have to also look at, okay, how do you get to that point? Like, how do you get to that point where you have this program that is the program? If you're one of the top high school players in the country, like Tennessee's a place that you want to go, or it's just understood that you're supposed to go there. And a lot of times you do have to start that at the youth level. You have to decide, okay, in this state, like everybody, we're going to be a basketball-crazed state. We're going to be a women's basketball-crazed state. And to get out in that far ahead of everybody else and be doing it in the mid-70s when she first starts, and to be in her 20s, to have that vision, like that's nothing. Then it just kind of becomes this self-sustaining deal because there isn't anybody that's even competing with you. Like there's no one else that has the stability and success that you have. I can't imagine being at that level of a coach where just your program is so far ahead of everybody else's for as long as her run.
You know how hard it is to sustain that success, how impressive that is, because you can get the best talent, you can get them, but you have to command that respect. You have to be able to develop that talent because people get complacent. You know, it's hard. You feel entitled, but that they never lost that hunger and that desire to be champions and played as hard as ever for Pat Summitt. There was that respect that was there, that was earned, that her players went through there. And, you know, from start to finish, they all came out better people and better basketball players.
Her salary when she first took over as the head coach at the University of Tennessee was $8,900. In the 2008-2009 season, she made $1.4 million. She was the first women's coach to earn over $1 million in a season. Her high school gym is named after her. The court at the University of Tennessee is named after her. There is a street named after her at the University of Tennessee. The court at University of Tennessee Martin is named after her. There is a street named after her at the University of Tennessee Martin. We are Mike and Mike. We're presented by Progressive Insurance. Our guests on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Again, very sad news this morning. If you're just waking up and joining us, legendary women's college basketball coach Pat Summitt has died at the age of 64. We will spend the morning seeking reaction to this and certainly cover the rest of the news on a busy sports day with Russillo and Cannell in here on Mike and Mike. Right now, a word from Uber. Listen, we all have those times when we need a little extra money. Here's a really easy way you can make some, and that is driving with Uber. Uber is a smartphone app that connects riders with drivers, helps you make extra money driving your own car. It's totally flexible. You don't have to quit your day job to make more money because Uber lets you make extra money on your schedule. Whenever you need to make extra money, just turn on the app and drive. A few hours here, a few hours there, it all adds up fast, and it's really easy to get started. First, go to uber.com/. Back on Mike and Mike and our Sports Center. There's only one story this morning, and that is just within the last half hour, the news coming across the wire that Pat Summitt has died, the legendary women's college basketball coach from the University of Tennessee. Again, if you were following the news over the weekend, her family had made clear the end was near. And so, again, we are so sorry to be reporting this morning that Pat Summitt has died at the age of 64. I'm reading so much about her here as we are going through this, and we are hoping to have Bruce Pearl for you here in a moment. Russillo and Kinnell are in with me today. The members of the basketball community who have received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor that we have in the United States, are John Wooden, Bill Russell, Dean Smith, and Pat Summitt. Again, to try to give some perspective to perhaps younger people who don't have an understanding. People, for example, my kids' age, Danny, your kids are younger than my kids. So my kids have grown up in a world where women's college basketball exists. It matters. I don't know exactly how to quantify how much it matters, but it does matter in a way it most certainly did not when Pat Summitt became the coach at Tennessee, again, making $8,900 in her first year, 2 years after Title IX, several years before it became an NCAA sanctioned sport, women's basketball. And there is no one person more responsible for its growth than Pat Summitt was.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people tweeting in, try to find it, for the younger generation so you can kind of understand what a big deal. So a lot of Alabama fans saying she was the Bear Bryant. In current times, maybe she'd be the Bill Belichick, but it's probably a disservice to her to try to find a comp because she truly was one of a kind.
Yeah, Bear Bryant was preceded by Newt Rockne, and she created this. It was like it was nothing, and then Pat Summitt came along, and she's certainly not the only reason, but again, she was the overwhelmingly dominant figure during the period of time that it went from being what little it was to the enormity that it is today.
You mentioned that $8,900 she made at basically 22, 23, taking over, and she was a grad assistant, and the head coach took a sabbatical, and they go, hey, do you want the job?
Yeah.
So like so many of these legendary stories, it starts in a way that it wasn't supposed to. But just going through and running through some of this stuff and how much basketball is a part of her life. Her parents moved from one town in Tennessee to another one because the original town they were growing up in didn't have a girls' high school basketball team. And they were like, all right, well, we're out of here. And they moved to another town so that their daughter Pat could play in high school.
By the way, that gym is now named after her. Sports Center with Micah Micah is brought to you by Dollar Shave Club. You know we love Dollar Shave Club. Did you know they've got other grooming stuff as well, like their Boogie's hair cream, the styling product you've been searching for. You can get Boogie's hair styling products in the box with your razors or by themselves. Check it out at dollarshaveclub.com/Mike. There are other things in the news this morning. I'll give you a check of Sports Center headlines. Chris Bryant had an he had an unprecedented night last night. He had 3 homers and 2 doubles. First player in history to put up those numbers as the Cubs beat the Reds. The Indians won their 10th straight. Iceland beat England, which is one of the great upsets in the history of sports at the Euros. But all of that taking a backseat this morning with the news that Pat Summitt has died. Her son Tyler has released the following statement. I'll read it to you. It is with tremendous sadness that I announce the passing of my mother, Patricia Sue Head Summitt. She died peacefully this morning at Sherrill Hill Senior Living in Knoxville, surrounded by those who loved her the most. Since 2011, my mother has battled her toughest opponent, early onset dementia, Alzheimer's type. She did so with bravely fierce determination, just as she did with every opponent she ever faced. Even though it's incredibly difficult to come to terms that she is no longer with us, we can all find peace in knowing she no longer carries the heavy burden of this disease. For 64 years, my mother first built her life upon a strong relationship with her Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Her foundation was also built upon love of her family and of her players and love of the fundamentals of hard work, which reflected her philosophy that you win with people. It's a lengthy statement. I won't read it all to you. It's easy to find online. Finally, he writes, we are in the process of finalizing the details of a public celebration of her life, which will take place in one of her favorite places, Thompson Boiling Arena. Once those details are finalized, we will share them with you. Thank you. Again, the news over the weekend, they had released a statement saying the past few days had been difficult. The disease had progressed. You could read through the lines and tell that the end was near. And so, again, as of this morning, the news that Pat Summitt has died at the age of 64.
How cool is this little nugget I just found? So she took over the head coach of Tennessee in 1974. In 1976, she was actually a player on the 1976 women's Olympic team, was a co-captain of that team, won silver medal. Then just in 1984, coached the women's basketball team to a gold medal. So pretty cool that she's still playing internationally while she was coaching Tennessee, building up this program. I think that's something a lot of people forget, and they don't realize that she was also a great player as well as a great coach.
As you get a little bit older, I do this thing, right? Whenever we're talking about gender, whenever we're talking about race, you try to go like, instead of, oh, wow, I guess that isn't great, you try to actually think of like, what would it feel like to have this thought of you? Like, what would it feel like if you felt like you had these limitations put in front of you because of something that you can't control. And when she takes over this women's team that, wasn't even considered like worthy of paying attention to, again, the money, you couldn't even get scholarships back then. Like, do you know what kind of toughness you have to have? Like, we can talk about some of the male coaches that are incredible, have these amazing resumes, but yet at that time, like, you have the support. You were expected to be successful. You are a priority. And there's this story apparently back in the day where they were playing at LSU and the game went into overtime, and Dale Brown, who's the head coach of the LSU's men's team, walked in and was like, well, forget this overtime with this women's game. Like, you guys go play in another gym. Like, take your teams, get out of our auditorium so the men's team can start their game on time, and you guys go play somewhere else. And, look, the story goes, she just stared them down, and they were able to go ahead and finish their game. And there's countless stories that I'm sure we'll share throughout the day today, but it's just so much more than, okay, you won so many games. You won 8 national titles. You had as big a challenge outside of the court than you did every night that you were tipping it off, because let's face it, in the 70s, this time, where we were as a country, and really the sports thing has progressed so much in such a rapid amount of time here, it's worth remembering that, man, like, nobody even was taking it seriously. So she wasn't just winning games, she was building something despite very little support.
When the news from her family over the weekend came across, I saw this tweet from Kate Fagan, our Kate Fagan, which I just went back and found, and she was a women's college basketball player, Kate was, and she tweeted on Sunday, Pat Summitt news knocks the wind out of me. She earned our game respect, which bought us as kids the ultimate freedom. We believed we mattered. That I think is the way what we're trying to say here, to the point that you're making, is like she had to somehow convince everyone, meaning her own players, the people around her, and then everyone beyond that what they were doing mattered, that someone should be paying attention to it other than themselves. Kate went on to tweet later in that day, we were lucky growing up hooping in the 90s, free to believe we had respect because few had the platform to disrespect us, and we had the example of Pat Summitt. That's what Pat Summitt meant to people like Kate, who were college basketball players, and remember a time, again, when that sport meant nothing. I don't know how to quantify. You could look at television ratings and revenue and
television
all that kind
ratings.
of stuff.
I mean, who's showing up to the games?
That's what I mean. Like right now, you can try and, I don't know, there's some metric by which we can calculate women's college basketball is X. I don't know.
Well, now, I mean, look, the fact that it's on, and we cover it. Look, I'm not saying it's a men's tournament and filling out a bracket, but like it's on the radar. It is part of our television production every single year, and I think the job that we do on it, like, it's in the beginning you're like, wow, we're putting a lot into this, like we're paying a lot, but the ratings are good, the numbers are good for it. So to show that it's that kind of product, and one of the other things when she took over, they used to play 6-on-6, but they would only have 3-on-3. So only 3 members of your 6-person team were allowed to cross half court because they didn't think girls could handle the contact.
Are you're serious? I mean,
I'm totally serious. I'm going through and reading all this stuff. So when she first took over, they were, they
were 6-on-6, but only 3 of them could cross half court.
Now, I don't know if that was in high school and then they changed it into college, but it was only 3 girls were allowed to cross half court, and then you would switch. It'd be offense, defense, because they didn't want too many people, I don't know, running into each other.
We keep talking about her impact on college basketball because that's what she was, a college basketball coach. But the WNBA is probably not around if it hadn't been for her success in building up the brand of the sport the way she did. There wouldn't be people who would be able to play.
We're trying to get Bruce Pearl for you here and get his reaction. We'll continue to get further reaction. I have a ton of your reaction on Twitter this morning. We'll have more of that as we continue. Again, the sad news today that Pat Summitt has died at the age of 64. Russillo and Cannell are in for Golick. We're back in a moment. Right now, a word from Burger King. Guess how much the $1 classic grill dogs are at Burger King this July 4th weekend? Well, that's right. They're $1. Classic grill dogs from Burger King, made with 100% beef, flame grilled, and this Saturday and Sunday, they're just $1. To get the deal, all you have to do is ask for it. It's the holiday weekend, so let Burger King do the grilling for you. Try a classic grill dog for just $1, only at participating Burger King restaurants. The offer is valid July 2nd and 3rd. Limit 5 per transaction while supplies last. Back in a moment. Mike and Mike. We are Mike and Mike, and Russillo and Cannell in for Golick. Again, if you're just waking up and joining us, the very sad news this morning, Pat Summitt has died at the age of 64, the legendary women's basketball coach from the University of Tennessee, whose impact on the sport and on sports in general cannot really be overstated. Carl Lipscomb tweets at us, condolences to the Summitt family. What a legendary person, an example of greatness, hashtag respect. Marshall Holcomb tweets at us, Pat Summitt, one of the best, hashtag RIP Coach Summitt. Lisa White tweets, gone way too soon, amazing person, RIP Pat Summitt, thoughts and prayers to the family. Anthony Newman tweets, Pat Summitt was the godmother of women's college basketball, respected by all, feared by some, class personified. Steve Evans tweets, one of a kind, a true legend, RIP Pat Summitt. RIP Pat Summitt is right now the #1 trending topic in the United States. Again, Russillo and Cannell are here, guys. Sad news, and we're continuing to get reaction from across the world of sports.
When you think about having to, fight this kind of disease, and she had said once the doctors laid out a plan for us, you don't know me, but she did describe in her book later on as if it was footprints on a beach, right? Being washed away on this. And you mentioned it a little bit there, Greeny. I can't imagine how frustrating is not the right word. I'm sure you're frustrated by the disease, but how much of a challenge it can be, and especially this just iconic figure, and to watch her not be the same person. You do feel for the family on that one, because it's not just about today; it's about everything they've been going through the last few years.
And you had spoke a lot about her, the fact that she set up the Pat Summitt Foundation, right away to try to find a cure, to try to find some sort of way out of this disease for people down the road. It's just sad, just really sad day.
All right, we'll take a very quick timeout here, just 10 seconds long. We'll come back with more on Mike and Mike. Mike and Sports Center is brought to you by Shell. If you're headed out to watch your favorite baseball team, stop at Shell and fill up with Shell V-Power Nitro Plus Premium Gasoline. It provides the best total engine protection you can get, period. And don't forget to sign up for free for the Fuel Rewards program at fuelrewards.com/ESPN. Ryan Russillo and Danny Cannell are in with me this morning. Russillo and Cannell, you hear them every weekday afternoon here, coast to coast on ESPN Radio. And again, if you're just waking up and joining us, we are so sorry to be the ones to tell you that Pat Summitt has died, and we are trying to put into some perspective the significance of her career. Again, when someone who is as famous and as impactful as she was passes away, it is really two different things. You think to yourself about her family, about her son, and about those who were closest to her, and the fact that they lost a person. For the rest of us, we lost like this larger-than-life figure. And people like her, and she was only 64 years old. She was only 59 when she was diagnosed. Somehow people like her never feel like they're going to die. When you're a distant, again, she's not someone that I knew. I met her, but she's not someone who was close to me in my life. People like her just feel like they're going to be around forever. And she was so... You never came across a person who just seemed tougher than Pat Summitt seemed. So the notion that something like this can happen is so terribly sad, and I guess a reminder of just how insidious a disease this is and how difficult it is. And again, some of us who've been through something that would be relatively similar know, just at least have an idea of what the family has gone through for the last few years.
Well, you mentioned the toughness there, okay? So if you think about her upbringing and going back and reading this stuff, growing up on a farm, and the father telling her, you're in on everything. Like, you're out there dealing with feeding the animals, cutting things down. And he said to her, cows don't take days off. So whenever you think about her in that glare, you do think about toughness. Like, yeah, we can talk about success and the resume and all that stuff, but she was really, really tough. She was tough on her players, but tough in a way that almost isn't as accepted anymore. We really seem as a society have problems now when coaches are challenging younger players, at least at the college level.
Right, when they coach hard.
Right,
they coach tough, and she did it and stuck to it.
Yeah.
And what's amazing about it is that the players that played for her, again, you go back and you look at almost all of them to a T who were paying their respects now. They talk about the impact that toughness had on them and how she instilled a toughness in her teams that goes further than basketball. That's the thing I want to get to, is that as much as we can go over the 8 national championships, all the wins, the impact that she had on her players is much greater than the game of basketball. And that's probably her her greatest, most lasting legacy is that impact.
Some of the stories are legendary. I read this one over the weekend. Pat Summitt was such a competitor, she refused to let a pilot land in Virginia when she was on a plane and went into labor while on a recruiting trip in 1990 because she wanted the baby to be born in Tennessee. So she told the pilot to keep going. Can we find, because or just a tiny piece of that story is here in this Associated Press report that I'm reading right now, but that's a part of a longer story. Can someone get that to me? Because that was the story of the birth of her son, which I read over the weekend. There's more to it than just that. It's a remarkable story, and I want to read it to you in its entirety, but that's just a little tiny piece of it. Virginia had beaten her Lady Vols a few months earlier, preventing them from playing for a national title on their home floor. Again, she refused to allow the baby to be born in the state of Virginia. I have a few more tweets here. Should I get those? April tweets at us, R.I.P. to the top Lady Vol, Pat Summitt. You were an inspiration to all women and will be missed. J. Todd Egger tweets, Pat Summitt was the Bear Bryant of college basketball, universally loved and respected. Money Mike tweets, Pat Summitt was the only female coach who would have succeeded coaching the NCAA men. I don't know if she was the only one. She may have been the first one. Sean tweets, a sports icon has died in Pat Summitt. She made us stand up and pay attention to women's basketball. And Tammy tweets, Summitt was such an inspiration to all of us working moms. Not easy, but can be done. I am very sad today. Hashtag Superwoman. Hashtag RIP Pat.
We've lost some iconic people here in a very short amount of time, whether it's Muhammad Ali, Gordie Howe, and, music and all that kind of stuff. But I can't imagine, like, as sad as this day is today and everything the family has gone through, like, to be somebody that impacts that many people, that is the catalyst for so much change, like she would be for women's sports in college. I know today is maybe it's too soon to kind of sit back and recognize that, at least for the family, because she has just passed. But you always kind of hope you can have something in your life that you've done that's special. Very few of us do anything that's really that important that people can point to and go, that guy made a difference or that guy had an impact here or there. Your mother, however many relatives you want to connect to this whole thing, she was the most important person in, I don't know if it's women's college basketball, it might be in women's college sports.
I'm trying to find this story here, which I will get you in its entirety for a moment as soon as I can. I don't think there's any question she's the most, I'm just thinking through what you just said, and it's not something I'd given a lot of thought to previously. I don't think there's any question she's the most significant person in the history of women's college athletics.
Right, and I'm not comparing her to Muhammad Ali or that kind of stuff. I'm just thinking about recent things that we've done a lot of these shows now in the span of just a few weeks, and it's just, I don't want to call it jealousy or admirable, but if you're the public guy, at some point you'd love to do something where you go, you know what, that person did this and it was great and this inspired me or this changed my life and all these different things. I mean, we're not doing that here, as great as the talk show may be. That's not happening, okay? I think we're all well aware of that. But when you go through all of this stuff, and it isn't just the resume, it's pretty, is it comforting, removed from the death where you go, I can't believe this person was this important and was a part of my family.
Yeah, she referenced her faith, and you look at it, and she put her life out there, and she gave it to others, and she impacted others. And I think you look at it, I think it's awe-inspiring. I think it commands so much respect and admiration that she did. Because when you are a coach across the board, you pour your life into others, and a lot of times it's more so than your own family, and you pour it into the young, people that come through your program. And I think that's pretty clear that that's what she did. And she poured all that love and all that sweat and all that effort and all those emotions into her teams and her players and her staff. And you see the impact that it has today. And it's just a lasting legacy that you cannot say enough about.
Yeah, I'm reading the story of this actually from her book, which was called Sum It Up. And she was talking about how she was in excruciating pain, having gone into labor on an airplane. And she heard the pilot from the cockpit saying, Pat, they want to put us down in Virginia and get you an ambulance. And she wrote, I had no intention of giving birth to my baby in Virginia. Virginia was the school that had knocked us out of the NCAA tournament and caused me so much pain. As far as I was concerned at that moment, it was a hateful state with absolutely nothing to recommend it. My baby wasn't going to be born anywhere but Tennessee. My home was in Tennessee. My husband was in Tennessee. RB was going to be present at the birth of our son. It had taken us 10 years to bring Tyler into the world. I didn't want him to miss it. He hadn't wanted to make the trip in the first place. I owed it to him to get home if I possibly could. I didn't want to face him if our son was born in Virginia. Between breaths and clenched teeth, I said, go tell them if they land this plane in Virginia, they're going to have a mad woman on their hands. The pilot hit the throttle hard. I found out later we burned 900 gallons of fuel in an hour, flew so fast the plane would have black exhaust streaks along the sides when we landed. They were waiting on the ground with an ambulance when he got there, and they got to St. Mary's Hospital. And that is, in her words, the story of how she gave birth in the state of Tennessee.
They get the recruit? Is that
That's the big question.
Yeah,
I would hope
I'm
so.
just literally reading it on the fly. Again, legendary stories like that. We will get more reaction to this and, of course, work our way to some of the other news of the day. But it is an enormous day in the world of sports, and the entire world is passing along their condolences, their thoughts, their memories, and their respect to one of the truly legendary figures in American sports. Pat Summitt dead at the age of 64. Russillo and Cannell are in for Golic today, and we'll be back with much more in just a moment. Stay with us right here on Mike and Mike.